Let's give it up for Bryce Roberts. Here we go.
Wow.
Welcome.
That was awesome. Awesome. I feel like I won the Super Bowl.
You did.
It feels like it. Let me get this straight. There we go. Do you guys hear me okay?
Okay.
All right, awesome. So, Bryce, you have a background not only in investing, but a little bit of entrepreneurialism yourself.
Sure.
So tonight, I kind of want to cover both sides of those, well, both sides of your experiences. And so let's start with that perspective of being an entrepreneur and introduce us to your roots and some of your initial ideas that you tried to launch.
Okay. Well, I remember, so I grew up in a house where my dad he was an attorney, but he had started his own firm. So we had this kind of entrepreneurial energy in the house, and my grandpa had done the same. And he was kind of one of these tinkers. He was always starting little businesses. So he had like an insurance agency, an accounting firm, a gas station, like, you know, all kinds of things that he was always trying out. So I was around that energy a lot growing up. And I remember specifically in high school, it was in the quad of our high school, and I remember looking around thinking, man, I bet most of these people don't have the guts to start something on their own. Like, it's hard, it's a lot of risk, and I bet these people won't do it. And if you had the conviction and courage to do something, I bet that would kind of set you apart from a bunch of people. And so I kind of had in my back pocket this idea that I wanted to be an entrepreneur, I wanted to start companies. But at the same time, my entrepreneurial experience was watching my dad build a law firm. So growing up, I thought I was going to be an attorney. So I graduated from BYU with a philosophy degree. I was the pre-law president. I was ready to go.
Wow.
Yeah, I was very excited to go be an attorney until I went and talked to law schools. And I'd applied and you know, talked to a bunch of different schools. And when I talked to them, I would say, look, here's why I want to go to law school. I want to go to law school because, you know, I'm probably not a CFO, and I'm probably, you know, kind of VP of marketing always feels a little squishy. I don't know, like, where you develop that skill set. It doesn't feel like in academia. So, you know, I could learn to be an attorney, and maybe that would be helpful to getting stuff started. And part of that was informed because down here in Provo, there's a bunch of successful guys who'd been part of founding teams that were attorneys. And so, so I thought that I would go that route until one of the administrators, you know, kind of pulled me aside and said, you know, you're going to waste 2 years, you know, what is it, 3 years, law school, 3 years? You waste 3 years of your life studying torts and all this stuff, you know, constitutional law that you have zero interest in, to maybe have an application in you know, in startups. And so I deferred the first year, and I went and did a ski startup.
Okay.
So we started a ski company back in 1999 in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. It was me and 3 partners. And, you know, I'd gotten married really young, so this was my opportunity to, like, go be a ski bum. And the reality of starting a ski company is that you don't ever ski because you are always kind of running this business. And so I did it for about a year, and you know, it became pretty clear that the, you know, my interest in kind of building a big brand and a big company was at conflict with my partners who really just wanted to ski. And so ultimately we kind of decided to part ways after that year, and I joined a startup here in town called Whizbang Labs, if anybody remembers Whizbang Labs. Whizbang was kind of a high flyer back in 2000, 2001, and as part, you know, when I joined to kind of help spin out a little project inside of Whizbang that was called FlipDog.com.
So what did FlipDog do at the time?
So, you know, I'll start with Whizbang. Whizbang was a bunch of, like, super talented algorithm engineers and machine learning people. You know, one of them was a guy named Alan Quas, who was part of that kind of PhD class that had Jerry Yang and Larry Page, and he had done a previous startup that was bought by Amazon. And the idea was, like, you know, machine learning and search is kind of a general class at that point. It was, you know, Google was just kind of coming on the scene.
Right.
But for the most part, it was like general purpose search and portals. And the idea was, let's take all that interesting stuff that's on the web and create siloed applications that, you know, did specific things. And so FlipDog was the first instantiation of that idea as like a portal for job searching.
Mm-hmm.
And so we would go scrape all the job postings that were on the web, organize them, and you had this. It wasn't like a meta search engine, because it wasn't like we were just crawling Monster and Hot Jobs or anything.
Right.
You were actually going to the employer's site and crawling them. And so so we did that. We did that until 2001, and then Monster acquired FlipDog in 2001.
So your role there, was it more on the business side of things, or?
So I was like a product guy there.
Okay.
I ran the revenue generating side of the product. So all the kind of employer facing products and stuff that I ran there.
Good side to be on.
It was good. Yeah, it was fun.
So with that first startup, when you were running off to do this ski business, how was that sell to your wife? Like, how did you convince her, hey, you know, we just got accepted into law school. I'm going to defer a year, and I'm not going to go ski.
Well, it's funny, you know, it was, she's totally my partner in everything. And so it was never a surprise. It's something we talked about for a long time, that like I had this itch I wanted to scratch. And you know, I worked all through undergrad, so we had some kind of cushion that we'd been able to save up. But I mean, when we started the ski company, I went from, you know, a pretty good salary to I was making $1,000 a month is what we were paying ourselves as founders. And so it was you know, I was married and I had a kid, and I was living on $1,000 a month. So that actually never became the issue. The money was never the issue.
Yeah.
It was, you know, she just trusted, you know, my judgment on things and believed in me, and that made a huge difference. And that's made a huge difference through all this stuff. I mean, I think the best thing you can be doing is you know, keeping a really clear, open communication with your spouse around any of this stuff, because it's a huge sacrifice, you know, for your family to jump into any of these startup things. So
with that ski experience, I don't know if I should call it that, but you had an exit, and you sort of went a different direction in your partners. At what point do you start having that conversation that, you know, I think I'm out?
What's that?
At what point do you start to verbalize that, you know, you're going to
I was young. I don't think I handled it right at all.
Oh, okay.
No, I was like, dude, you guys suck. I'm out of here. It was real. I mean, it was like, I felt, you know, it was as bad as when I broke up with girls in college. I just never called them back. Like, it's terrible. It's terrible. It was one of those things where I was like, all right, I'm just done. I'm so sick of like this thing. You guys go do it. Yeah.
Where'd Bryce go?
It kind of was one of those things. It was like 2 weeks later, hey, are you still around? And I was like, no.
Yeah.
I'm out of here.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they're still going. You know, it's still a thing.
Wow.
And it, you know, it was one of those things where, you know, it never became a big business.
Sure.
But, you know, one thing that, you know, I can take some pride in is that, you know, we were really the first ones to try it out. And now there's hundreds of new, you know, ski and action sport related startups. But up until that, we were the first ones to try something new, like true garage style, in like 10 years. And now, you know, there's all kinds of brands that are out there. And I've been able to have a weird background where I can be helpful to those people too.
That's cool.
You know, started.
So that experience of it not being necessarily your best exit, or
no, it wasn't an exit. It was terrible.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
but what it did is, like, you know, we took a fairly uninteresting business. Most people had kind of written it off.
Yeah.
And, you know, as someone who'd wanted to do startups, like, you know, in our little corner of the world, it was very successful, right? Like, we were, you know, I mean, as silly as it sounds, like, we were featured in, I don't drink, but we were featured in a Dewar's Scotch, like, national ad. Like, we were in the New York Times, we were in the Washington Post. Like, people were writing about it, people were really excited about what we're doing, we were selling everything out. And so whether or not it became a big business, what it did for me was it started to flex the entrepreneurial muscle, right? It's like, you know, when you start lifting weights, you can hardly lift anything, but as you keep at it, you start adding weight and you start to get conditioned to doing it. And I think for our family, that was probably the best thing to happen, where, you know, in our early 20s, like we started flexing those muscles. We started to realize, hey, look, if everything goes sideways, we can live on $1,000 a month.
Yeah.
We can we know what's important. And so, I think whether or not that worked out, what it did for us is it just conditioned us to taking risk. Like we felt confident that whatever we chose to go do, like we could have a real impact and we can grow something. Because if we could grow a stupid ski company, like we can grow almost anything.
Yeah.
And then it just, it just, that first leap is always so hard. It's so hard. And so recognizing that you can do it, that like you didn't lose everything, that you didn't die doing it, like that's huge. And to learn that lesson early on, it has informed all the other decisions I've kind of made throughout my career.
So when you're trying to, when you're going through these experiences, and it does take all that, preconditioning, it seems like you think about things a lot ahead of time, and then you come up to it's time to make this leap. What do you do once you start to doubt yourself or say, this probably wasn't the best idea, or do you have those type of thoughts when you're on the entrepreneurial side of things?
I don't think, hindsight's always it's a terrible thing to pay attention to. You can learn lessons, but you don't beat yourself up over it. There are certainly mistakes we made at that company, mistakes we've made at OATV. There's plenty of mistakes along the way. But I think one of the hallmarks of an entrepreneur is to not let that stop. I think by nature we're optimists, and hopefully we're like balanced optimists in the way we kind of look at the world. And so you try not to get too hung up, and you try to tease out the lessons as opposed to just beating yourself up over it.
So what keeps you in balance? Is it your sources of information, the people you partner with, your wife? What is it?
A lot of it's just your own instinct. None of like if you look at a lot of the decisions that entrepreneurs make, most of them aren't intuitive decisions. Like most of them to the outside don't necessarily look like obvious decisions, and most of the companies that end up having a real impact are the ones who are able to kind of make those decisions with confidence versus those who are, they're trying to mitigate risk, or they're trying to, they end up making kind of the obvious bets, and most of the time those obvious bets don't pan out. When we started OATV in 2006, the seed stage fund was not an obvious thing. It took us 2 years to raise it.
Yeah.
But it was like, I knew we could do it. I never, ever doubted we could do it. My partner, I think he was questioning it. But like, I was like, I was just convinced we would make it happen. And, I think when you put that kind of energy out, I think it comes back to you.
Okay. So now let's go to you starting a conference. Open source. Now that is not your typical entrepreneurial approach, but it very much takes advantage of all those traits you've cultivated.
Sure. No, that was like a classic nights and weekend project. I had a decent job at the time. I was at a firm here in town it's now called Epic Ventures. It was called Wasatch Ventures at the time. Mm-hmm. I had a good job. I liked what I was doing. I liked the people that I was working with. But I went to Linux World, and I was like, man, this is terrible. This is like a huge vendor show. There's a lot more interesting stuff going on, and nobody's talking about it. We're just talking about like rack servers and Linux and all this stuff. And so on the flight back from Linux World, I was sitting next to my friend who was at Novell at the time, kind of crafting their open source strategy, a guy named Matt Acey. And we just like flipped open the laptop, and we're like, who's interesting? Mm-hmm. Like, who wasn't there? Who are people who should kind of be highlighted? And from my perspective, I thought, well, I'm just like this nobody in Utah, right? Nobody who knows who I am. Right. Nobody none of these like top tier guys are paying attention to us. But if we gave them a platform, they'd probably return our calls. If we gave them a chance to like speak in front of 1,000 people, we could probably like start building out our network. And so, so from my side, it was, I'm interested in deal flow and I'm interested in building my network. From his side, it was interest in building his network and interest in, making money potentially. So, he was able to line up kind of a nice situation with Novell where they were really excited about the idea right out of the gate. Okay. And kind of underwrote most of the event, and then we had a great turnout. We ended up getting our like list of top 20 people we wanted. We got 20 of those 20. It was like, wow. Yeah, it was an awesome who's who. And as a result, like all of a sudden I'm no-name associate at, a small fund in Utah, and I'm like having interaction and talking deal flow with like the top tier VCs on Sand Hill Road. And so it was an interesting, experiment in kind of broadening your network. And that was a real game changer for me, both financially. We had a great outcome from it. We ended up selling it to a group called IDG out of Boston. But it also opened the door to OATV. I mean, I didn't know, I didn't know Tim O'Reilly before we started OSBC, and that, part of the story is Tim tried to buy a conference we sold to somebody else, but that kind of opened the door to like so many other things that I wouldn't have even anticipated if we hadn't invested in that. Yeah, so it was awesome.
So with these type of events, like you have to book this thing months in advance, and you have to put down sizable money. Did Novell really?
We totally hacked the thing. Like we found a venue that would not charge us anything if we would commit to a block of rooms and sell out the block of rooms.
Okay.
And so we, the risk was if we didn't sell out that block of rooms, we're on the hook for it.
Yeah.
And so we pushed that really hard, and we got that block of rooms sold. And so we had, if you've ever been there, it's the Westin St. Francis in Union Square of San Francisco, and we sold it out, and it was awesome. So we just found little ways to kind of hack and work around the system. I mean, I think back then this was 2004, and so the economy wasn't all that healthy, and that was part of why we got so much interest in the conference. Was nobody had really seen that kind of attendance for years, because after the bubble, nobody, all that budget just got cut. And so to kind of show up and be able to have a successful show right out of the gate ended up opening a lot of doors for us.
How long did it take for you, from the point that you had made a call and you signed up the venue, how much time did you have to sell all those rooms?
Like 3 months or something like that, 4 months.
That's pretty fast.
We sold it fast, yeah. People were really excited about it. It was just one of those things where, most of the stuff I do, I try to just be absolutely confident that I can pull it off. And it was one of those things where when we sat down, I just knew we would pull it off. Okay. I just knew it would work. And so we were willing to take risks and make it happen. And I had great partners on that who filled in skills that I didn't have. So it just worked well.
Okay. Yeah. So now moving on to OATV. Because of the open source conference, it opened up the door for you to, meet this network of people. Yeah. And whose initial idea was it?
So it was an interesting series of events. So it was, I had been at Wasatch for 4 years. I was getting antsy. And when I was talking to O'Reilly, and so I had been thinking in my mind, okay, if I were to go start something new, what would it look like? And given that I'd been at a regional fund, my mindset was kind of what would a proper regional fund look like? Because I was seeing, at the time, the names in Salt Lake were Utah Ventures, it was Wasatch, it was V-Spring. And so I looked at that and I was like, no, those really aren't working that well. So if I were to do it, here's what I do. And I was starting to kind of think it through. And then the conversation started with O'Reilly, and we started kind of going back and forth around they had done some angel investing and backed some great companies, Blogger.com, when they were the original backer, and a few others that had a nice return. And they had some ideas around kind of doing a small seed. Actually, back then, the original idea was a Web 2.0 fund. Okay. Because they had just coined this term Web 2.0. They just started that conference, and people were getting really excited about it. They were seeing pitches from the Flickr folks and the Delicious folks, and all those companies from way back then were coming to O'Reilly because they were kind of the thought leader there. And so when we kind of came together to decide we wanted to work together, it was I don't buy the Web 2.0 thing. We don't want to do the regional thing. Where's the opportunity? And the opportunity for us back then was seed stage investing. It's everybody knows about it now, but gap between angels and traditional VCs, and we came to the table with this really unique set of relationships, given that O'Reilly's been in the tech and publishing business for 30 years, and so we kind of spin the story, because at the time, I didn't have any kind of track record. I'd been like a junior guy at Wasatch. I didn't have much to offer. But they had their track record, they had the deal flow. So that was that was kind of how it came together. Was we just kind of filtered ideas, and then that was the one where like after they really held on to the Web 2.0 thing for a while, and I was pushing the seed stage thing, and it was one of those where it just like all these others, it clicked. I was like, I know how to raise that fund. I know how to tell that story. I can go get it done, and I think that will be a winner of a strategy. And we had this kind of head fake because the first close we made was in December of 2005. We started raising it in August 2005. We had our first close in December 2005 of $35 million, and we thought, wow, this is going to be so easy. We only wanted to raise $50 million. We just raised like $35 million like that. And then for the next whole year, like we slogged it out with institutional investors. The first group was like all, it was like all Tim's friends. It was like all people who, it was like Ev from Blogger, wanted to invest, and Mitch Capor. Like it's a really good group of people that kind of they had the history with O'Reilly, and so they knew like what they would be getting. And then the institutional folks, I mean, they thought we were the O'Reilly factor when we walked in. They're like, what does Bill O'Reilly have to do with tech? And who's this guy? And, so it took a little bit longer, but we actually ended up kind of shooting a little past our target. We ended up raising 52 or 53 million for that first fund.
Okay.
And then we were in business.
So
awesome.
When you were telling that story at the time, what was different and what really differentiated yourselves?
Well, nobody was doing it. And so, when we went to individuals, they were like, oh, it's Tim, like, of course. When we went to institutional investors, they're like, we just got wiped out. Like, all of our early stage portfolio just got completely written off. Like, everybody just did down runs. Why in the world would we want to invest earlier stage? Like, that's the worst idea we've ever heard. And so, and our story was, the economics have changed and people can do more with less, and there's like the Sandhill guys won't play here, and the Angels, their cash got wiped out during the downturn as well, and so that's kind of how we positioned ourselves, and it wasn't an easy sell at all. Yeah. So
when I have been looking at your profile as an investor, it seems, at least from the outside to me, that you really take things on a different approach than what is like. I mean,
eclectic, yeah.
I'm waiting for the book to come out and sort of your, memos of a very interesting investor, and where you just kind of like, I was brushing my teeth and I just knew it, and there it was. Like, what is it? What is your approach? Describe it to people, and what makes you tick there?
Yeah, well, I always say to our LPs, those are the investors in our fund, I say, we may not always be right, but we'll always be interesting. And we'll always be in categories that ultimately end up, somebody's going to make money in there, whether we do or not. Something will come around. So we have this thesis that we've been building the fund off of from the beginning, which is, it was really informed by O'Reilly, and it was, in our pitch deck for our second fund that we raised, I had this evolutionary graph, and it was, the ape to the upright human, and along that continuum, I had like weekend hobbyist hackers, and then on the far end we had entrepreneurs, and so we have this belief that the most impactful, interesting technology rides a very similar evolutionary curve. It starts with people hacking and working on things that take up their spare time.
Right.
They're side projects. They don't look that interesting. They certainly don't look like companies. But as more and more of what we call alpha geeks, who are, an alpha geek in our mind is someone who is, in any category, whether it's fashion, sports, there's like somebody who's got it. Like it's somebody who has like really good taste. They always know like the band before anybody else does. They always know like the designer and the shoe before anybody else does. And we think we know that there's the same in tech. There are people who are tastemakers in tech, and we call them alpha geeks. And so we pay attention to the projects that they start throwing their energy behind. And as they kind of come up that evolutionary curve, there's a point at which it makes sense for OATV to get involved. And that isn't when it's like a fully developed, mature market. So, the challenging part for describing OATV in a nutshell is that a lot of our peers say, we're into e-commerce, we're into mobile, and we have this like weirdly nuanced theme, this strategy that we keep going back to in terms of like trying to find the things that are just like coming out of the primordial soup. They're just starting to like get some alpha geek attention, and then we try to apply our own thinking around what the timing of that looks like, where that makes sense, as an investment.
So where do you do your best thinking? Do you find that all of this is it in Excel, or are you? I mean, I'm saying like you have to do a lot of diligence and for where you're putting your money at, or maybe you don't. Is this something that as you're washing the dishes, this is where you can go and say, what? I think now's the time on this idea. How does that? You've got this continuum that looks great in a slide deck.
Yeah.
What does it look like in real life?
It's messy, like everything is messy, right? And yes, there is definitely diligence to do. I mean, we certainly do a lot of spending time with entrepreneurs and getting to know them. But it's not like we're doing a ton of financial analysis, right? Like, what's the projection of a company that just did their alpha for their for their new product? How do you model? We have a company called Planet Labs. How do you model a company that hasn't even sent a single satellite up into orbit? How do you model that? What does that look like? Who are the comps for that? Like the comps are NASA. How do you? So it comes down to, what do you think of the entrepreneurs? Are they people who can pull it off? Are you personally interested in their project? Because I think a lot of, the hardest no's we have to tell people are like, I just don't think what you're doing is interesting personally. Like, if I'm signing up for 4 or 5 years of working with you on this thing, or 10 years, or however long it is, like, I gotta feel like it's something I want to throw my energy behind. And sometimes that works, and sometimes those companies end up turning into something completely different. But initially, there has to be chemistry with the founders, and there has to be excitement about the idea, and you have to kind of project forward to see what it is, what it could potentially become if everything worked.
So when I, as an entrepreneur, are coming in to get half an hour of your time, what things are you looking for in that time? Because I mean, I'm not going to have an Excel spreadsheet. I might have some slides that just help my thought process, but it sounds like it's we should go grab a burger, and you would appreciate the what I mean.
I would never turn down a burger.
Oh, okay. Sounds like I'm on something.
You're onto something. Definitely onto something. No, I mean, I think for us, I've always said, be interesting or be doing something interesting. Right? Because a lot of the founders we end up backing are first-time entrepreneurs, and so if you're a proven entrepreneur, you're not likely raising a seed round. Right. You're going to Sand Hill Road. You're raising $10 million, $20 million, $30 million right out of the gate. So a lot of the risk we end up taking is founder risk. We take risks on people, and sometimes that pays off, and people really develop into fantastic entrepreneurs, and sometimes a lot of times it doesn't. But you kind of, what we do is we'd evaluate who you are. Like, are you an interesting person? Have you done interesting things? Like, have you taken risks? Have you, even if it hasn't been starting a company, like, silly things like, what kind of person were you in school? What kind of things did you, what kind of side projects have you done that have been interesting? Those are the kinds of things that we end up having to hold on to figure out if somebody's worth backing.
Can you share an example of one of your most memorable pitches, and maybe what was the idea that came?
It's memorable. One we funded or one we didn't fund?
I'll leave it up to you.
We have a lot of really, we have a lot of really weird pitches.
Okay.
Yeah, a lot of weird things happen.
Keeping it interesting.
Yeah. Well, there's interesting and then there's weird. Right? I'm a fan of interesting. I'm not a big fan of weird. No, I mean, we have just weird stuff happen all the time. People like bring their spouses to pitch meetings, and they sit there, and you're like, why are you here? You don't even work for the company. It's just, it's off the walls. It's like people who read way too much TechCrunch, who like think there's a certain way this game's played, and and oftentimes it isn't. A memorable pitch. Well, so Foursquare was an interesting one because I'd gotten to know Dennis right after he left, left Google, and he went to join a friend's kind of it was a professional services shop, and they did a bunch of different projects, and so he went over there. We were getting to know each other, and right before South by Southwest, like 5 years ago, he sent me an email and says, "Hey, you should try this out." And I said, "I'm in Salt Lake. It's not going to work. You don't care about Salt Lake." And then like a month went by, and he pinged me and he said, "I think there's something here. Like we should talk." And so we talked, and the pitch was it was actually an O'Reilly event, Where 2.0, which doesn't, that was a conference we used to do when kind of location was and mobility was coming online, and I was sitting right next to my friend at another venture fund, and we were both getting the pitch at the same time, and we both had two completely different reactions to it. I was fascinated and totally got it and wanted to be a part of it, and he did not at all. So it was just interesting for me because very rarely as a VC are you in the same room with somebody else who's looking at an investment for the very first time. And so to leave a meeting and to have two very different reactions to a story, I thought was memorable in my mind.
Is that something that happens? Well, okay, so with your firm now, you've got a couple of different people who are evaluating these ideas with you. Do you find that the group is divided often?
Yeah. I think that's and sometimes for real, and sometimes for the sake of pushing each other harder to think about things. But yeah, there's plenty. Foursquare was one where we were pretty divided on it.
Okay.
I really wanted to do it. My partners were like, I don't think so. This does not sound all that interesting. And this guy, he just giving Google the bird, and he was this renegade guy, and everybody we knew told us that he was unfundable and that you'd never want to work with him, and so that took some kind of back and forth with the partnership.
And do you guys seek for majority? How?
Well, it's just two. It's really just two of us,
okay.
right? So Tim weighs in, but for the sake of Tim having kind of keeping his independence and kind of independent voice out there in the community, he doesn't have a vote on investments. So it's just my partner Mark and I.
Cool.
Yeah.
So now in a few minutes we're actually going to get a mic out to you guys so we can get some questions from the audience. But just as we wrap up, what interesting things, are you going to get the itch for something new? You sort of
I constantly go through a midlife crisis all the time.
It's
which is because I was there was a period where I was turning over into a new gig every year, every year and a half, and I was kind of used to that cadence and doing new stuff, and every once in a while I'll pull my head up and look at my wife and be like, man, I've been doing this for a long time.
Yeah.
This is our next year will be our 10-year anniversary, and I've never ever had a job for more than 10 years, and that is weird. But I really enjoy what we're doing, and I think that right now in venture the market is so dynamic that opportunity with kind of seed and early and that kind of $200,000, $300,000 check, though I think that is going away for institutional funds. I think there's every point on the continuum that contracts, another one opens up, and so I'm really excited about what we can build. And instead of freaking out about kind of 10 years and what I'm going to do, I can take a little pride in what it is we built, and I can kind of look at the foundation we have at the firm and see that there's we're fortunately in a position where we've done well enough that we have this platform to really experiment with and try new ideas out with, and it's that kind of experimentation and new ideas that I find really exciting.
Awesome. Guys, let's give it up. Come on. All right, so if you have some questions for Bryce, I'll run a mic to you.
I'm wondering how often you feel you stick with your initial reaction when somebody's pitching to you, kind of by the end of the pitch, and then the time that you spend thinking about it, doing your diligence.
Yeah, that's a really good question because it's something we wrestle with a lot. I think I am not a big fan of like that. The market is moving so fast right now that people are funding like in the first meeting, and there's really only, I mean, I can think of only a handful of companies where it was first meeting and I was like, I gotta work with these guys. And so I tend to want to noodle on things. I mean, in the case of Foursquare, right, we had, from the first time I met Dennis to when we made that initial investment, we had almost a year to get to know each other. And that made a huge, that informed a lot of my thinking on him as a founder and the idea as I'd kind of been able to watch it evolve a little bit. In this market, that's a real luxury to be able to have a meaningful amount of time. I mean, Runkeeper is another one where we're an investor now. But I was a user early on, and so I got to know that founder over like 3 years before we ended up, kind of being in a position to be able to invest in this company. I think there's wisdom in kind of tempering your initial, like not completely ignoring it, but like informing that initial impression, and whether that is ideating with somebody, whether it's going back and forth, making some intros and seeing how they react, what the response from the person you introduce them to is. Those are the kinds of things where, because we're making an investment right now, where the first time I met the founder, I was like, really? Everybody on my team was like, they're amazing. And I said, no, I don't see it. And then we went out one night and spent a good amount of time, and I was like, okay, now I get it. Like, I get what you all saw that maybe I missed. And that probably to me happens more than, I probably tend to put too harsh of a critical eye on people. I'm a harsh critic. Yeah.
So when you were mentioning that the funding game is getting a lot more crowded, a lot faster moving, and that and more aggressive.
Yeah.
You're hearing more and more stories about some of these larger groups muscling out other institutions during certain rounds.
Okay.
Has that happened to you guys where you've been pushed out by a more well-known group or someone with a little more influence and able to have the founder's ear? And when you see that happen, how do you, from what I understand, I mean, it's kind of viewed as Bush League, but how do you guys view that?
I mean, at the end of the day, we're all competitors, right? We're all trying to get a certain level of ownership and be involved in the companies that matter because, there are, I would say it's more than 10, and I would, I mean, the data probably suggests that. But, there's a handful of really great companies that help build a brand of a firm. So we historically haven't gotten cut out completely of investments, but what we tend to do is we end up having to cut back. So we just made an investment recently where we had a big chunk of the round spoken for, but they really, really wanted to work with somebody else as well as part of this syndicate, and so you just end up trying to be collaborative where you can. I'm trying to think of deals where we got completely, usually for us, when we get completely cut out of a deal, it's usually because of us. It's somebody who, they said maybe they could do $3 million, but they really want to raise $10 million, right? And so they kind of rationalize and they come up with a plan for $3 million, but really they want to raise 10. And if they get the opportunity to raise 10, they tend to take it. And for us, we just don't do those kinds of rounds. And so I wouldn't say there's any. I mean, there's people we've worked with that we wouldn't work with again, but not necessarily people that have crazy sharp elbows. But I mean, there's a whole new cast of characters coming into venture, and so we'll see how those guys kind of adapt. Most of them are playing relatively nicely. I mean, I think the jab that I hear that around most of the time is angels who are getting squeezed down by somebody who's coming in to lead a round, and we'll do that. We do have sharp elbows when it comes to that, because we like to have a certain amount of ownership, and we like to be involved at a certain level, and these party rounds, there are some entrepreneurs who really want to do them, and there are some that are only doing them because that's kind of the crowd who showed up. And so if we can kind of come and corral those rounds and write a significant check as well, even if that means cutting an angel back from $250K to $100K or $50K, we generally haven't had a lot of pushback from the entrepreneur, from the angels. I mean, most angels aren't doing this professionally, so whether it's 250 or 50, a lot of times it doesn't matter that much.
So first of all, I too majored in philosophy at BYU and thought I was going to go to law school, so I'm hoping that means something good.
Always.
But my question is, startups can be really roller coaster-like, right? And so emotionally, you're pivoting constantly, and I'm wondering, like, what essential habits or disciplines you felt like you developed early on or had to develop early on that saw you through to the success that you feel like you've achieved?
I think more than anything, like being honest with yourself and being honest with the people around you. I think communication, it's so easy as an entrepreneur to just carry it all on yourself and be really critical of yourself and kind of try to hold it together for everybody else that's around you, because you don't want everybody riding the roller coaster. But finding outlets and finding, like I said, for me, I've been fortunate to have a spouse who is like fully my partner. And so having an open ability to kind of communicate clearly with somebody like that, be really candid with them and really vulnerable, I think that makes a huge difference. I would say, the mistakes I made and the lessons that I've learned would be, just throwing more time at something doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work out. And so, I've definitely been the guy who's just checked out, who even when he's with his family, he's just like, like for some, I'm like looking at my phone thinking like there's another email coming in that's going to solve all this. And I think, kind of coming to terms with that, it was helpful just for my own kind of sanity. But I do think you also have to have a healthy sense of disillusionment too. I mean, you have to be you have to have an internal dialogue that's positive but real at the same time. Like, I think there are, I've met a lot of founders, and we backed some of them that have stayed with their company way too long. It was like clearly not working out. They were running themselves into the ground. There was not another pivot that was going to save them. And there are times where, it's just not going to work. But I think the habit I had was that kind of initial risk taking that just said, okay, even if it all goes sideways, even if it completely fails, like I'm still employable. The skills that I picked up are like going to make me more valuable, and it's not financial ruin for anybody. So I think that type of mentality has helped me along the way.
Hi, my name's Dan. Just one question. So, like, operationally with your business, when do you cash out? When do you like make the money, and how is that done? Do you make like a contract with them and say like, at this time you're gonna like give me money?
Oh man, that'd be awesome.
Because like, I asked because
if you've got a way to do it, I'm in.
It seems like with these companies like Foursquare, like whatever, these web companies, like I don't know when the time comes when they like start making money, if they ever start making money.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, how do you cash out on it?
You've got kind of in this new market, you have kind of three mechanisms for cashing out. One is when a company goes public, right, and you sell shares and you get to sell your shares. One is when they're acquired, and there's now liquidity. There's money coming in and buying out the existing shareholders. And in this new world, there are secondary funds that come in and buy founder shares and early investor shares. But there isn't a mechanism where we can say to the company, and we aren't in the business or really interested in taking like cash distributions from somebody. So a lot of businesses, they raise money and then these are kind of smaller cash flowing businesses will raise money and then they just pay back those investors over time. That's not how we're structured. We end up being partnering with the companies, taking the same taking risks, financial risks. Like we don't make money until those founders make money. In the broader sense. I mean, we make money on the fees we charge on the capital we're managing, but for the most part, we make money when they make money.
So let's do two more questions after this one.
Thank you. What would you say is the most compelling case somebody can make? Is it market research or something like that? They can come in and say, hey, this percentage of people believe in this, or here's some market data, or what is the most compelling evidence that carries weight with you?
I wrote a post a while ago. It was like something along the lines of like the minute you are trying to convince an investor with market data is the minute you fail. Like nobody gets convinced by that. Like at the end of the day, it's a fairly intuitive type of business. It's somebody who, like, regardless of the data you show them, like they kind of get it and they want to believe that that market is going to exist, right? Whether it's for themselves personally, it's an area they're interested in. They really want to believe. I mean, a lot of what you're selling early on is that, right? And so, sure, you can show trend data and you can pull up the graph that shows, iPhone market share and Android market share and what's happening with mobile. But at the end of the day, like people either get that and they believe in it before they see your graph, or they don't. I think people underestimate the personal nature of this business, right? Like so much of the investments that happen and the deals you see getting done are, it's personal connections with investors to the founders. They really like them. They like their idea. It's something they've wanted to invest in for a while. Like they've gone deep on a sector. There isn't, I haven't ever, anytime a founder of ours says, hey, I'm pitching these guys, they really like it, but they're asking for this data, like I know it's not going to go anywhere. And I have 100% hit rate on those people who are asking for data are really asking you to do their homework on a market that they're looking at, right, in general.
One more here.
Yeah.
So you're in a room full we're in a room full of entrepreneurs, and at some point we're all going to need a resource capital. But are there other resources that you offer for someone that's looking to you for an investor to be? What other utility have you given to different businesses, different guys with the
beyond cash or?
Beyond capital?
Help me understand it. So someone comes, like somebody we've invested in, or somebody who's just coming to us for the first time?
Well, either way. What are some things that people come to you? They need capital. You obviously can write a check.
Sure.
Are there other things that you will do with them? I'm sure you have a lot of networking.
Sure. I would say yes, and it's something we've worked to develop over time. A network that we can open people up to. Through O'Reilly, we have like all these interesting platforms that we can get people involved in, whether it's writing books or speaking at conferences or coming to kind of a bunch of the private events we hold, getting them access to customers or partners or developers' ears. There's a lot of stuff that we can offer along those lines. And we think that ends up differentiating us. But I would say, more than anything, it's like our biggest differentiator is the references from the founders we backed. I mean, I would say, we generally get high marks from the people we work with, and they are kind of our best selling point. Whenever somebody asks for a reference, or we can put a founder in touch with someone we're talking to for the first time, that tends to work out for us. But in terms of research, like we don't have a marketing team, we don't have a PR team, we don't have any of that stuff. I mean, some of our peers do it, and they do an exceptional job of it. But at the end of the day, you have to be honest with yourself about the kind of firm you can build. Like I'm very good friends with Josh Kaufman over at First Round. I've known him since before he started First Round, when he was just doing his Midas stuff. He's an amazing guy, and he's delivering exactly the kind of fund that Josh is like. That is totally the fund Josh should be building. It's not the fund that I should be building. Like I wouldn't be able to duplicate what they're doing or what Andreessen or some of these others are doing, just because it's not in our DNA and I don't have conviction around it. There's a certain kind of firm that we're going to build, a certain value add that we're going to try to bring, and it's going to be authentic to us, and hopefully something that people can only find in working with OATV.
So basically, one quick question,
yeah.
to make sure I understand. So basically, someone who comes to you for funding, they've got all the skills, all the resources they need to do what they need, but they need capital. That's kind of the feeling I'm getting. Is that correct?
Maybe I'm misunderstanding your question. Well, let's talk about it afterwards.
All right, last question right here. Sorry.
So we have like a unique scenario where people have come to us and say, we want to invest,
Mhm.
but we're not ready for investment, you know, in the months future or years from now, maybe. And so the question they say, well, we want to get to know you before you even do, like build a relationship with us. So what are some of your tips to honor that request? Like before we even consider raising money, how do we fulfill that request of let's build a relationship with people who come to us?
They're asking for the relationship, or you're asking to build the relationship so you have a more informed kind of, you're better calibrated when you're trying to make your decision for who you want to work with as investors.
This scenario, they're coming to us.
Okay. Right. They want to build a relationship with you. It's a little creepy. Slow walks on Utah Lake. Sharing Sundays at Cougar Creamery. No, I mean, I think basic stuff you can be doing is just, you know, kind of keeping an informal dialogue with them around wins that you guys are seeing. And what I encourage our founders to do when they're in a similar situation is to call on that person to see what kind of partner they would be if you need an intro here or an intro there, right? Like, you know, one of my favorite companies in our portfolio has a lot of inbound interest from investors all the time. And every time those people say they want to build a relationship, they say send us some leads. And it's such a great filter for them around who's serious and who really wants to build a relationship and who just needs to fill up the day, you know, because that's their job, is taking meetings and staying on top of things. So I would, you know, whatever wins you've got, if you show up in the press somewhere, I would send them a clipping, I would send them a link. I would, you know, I wouldn't spend a ton of time like, hey, let's meet up every couple of weeks and grab coffee and you tell me what's going on. I think that would be a waste of your time. But I think keeping them informed, you know, in your progress, I think is, if I were you, that would be the kind of level that I would keep them at, because at the same time as you would like to get to know them and they want to invest in you, you also want to keep your options open, you know, for who the partner is you ultimately end up bringing on. And if you're too into them, then it could cause real problems down the road when they decide they don't want to fund you and you haven't built relationships with anybody else. Yeah.
All right, guys, let's give it up for Bryce.